If your kids pull away, maybe it's not them, maybe it's you. Oof, sharp, right? But let's sit with it, not because it's entirely true, but because somewhere beneath the guilt, the quiet resentment, the 5-word texts with no punctuation, there's a deeper truth waiting to be heard. Welcome to Buddhist Wisdom for the Elderly, where we say the hard things with love and the dark things with laughter. This isn't a blame game, it's a soul check. You may have raised your kids with heart and hardship, but if your words now carry the emotional weight of a funeral announcement, they might be doing more harm than healing. In this video, we'll walk through 7 phrases that seem harmless, but quietly burn bridges with your adult children. For each, we'll show you what the phrase really says beneath the surface, why it stings more than you think, a real-life story that might sound a bit too familiar, and what to say instead, so love doesn't have to come with barbed wire. But if you watch just one part, don't miss part 5, I wish I had raised you differently. That one, it rewrites your child's identity, and not in a good way. If you're ready to reconnect without regret, hit like, subscribe, and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers so we can keep making these life-saving, ego-melting videos for beautiful souls like you. Let's begin with awareness, not blame, and a little laughter to light the path. Part 1, I wasn't like that at your age. Let's start with a classic. A phrase as old as parental pride and just as crusty, I wasn't like that at your age. Translation, you're messing up your life, and I need to remind you that I did it barefoot, uphill in a snowstorm, while holding down 2 jobs and making a meatloaf. Now look, I get it. You survived a world that didn't come with Google, therapy apps, or oat milk. Of course you did things differently. And yes, you might have raised 3 kids on one income while ironing shirts with one hand and spanking with the other. But here's the uncomfortable truth. That phrase, it doesn't land like wisdom. It lands like judgment with a side of superiority. And your adult children, those complex, overscheduled, anxiety-riddled beings who drink chamomile tea and call it self-care, they hear that phrase and think, oh great, now I'm failing as a person and disappointing my parent. Double whammy. The real danger of I wasn't like that at your age is that it closes the door to empathy. It says, my reality was harder, so yours isn't valid. It says, your pain doesn't count because mine had fewer options and more canned soup. You might not mean it that way, but trust me, that's how it sounds. You're not just comparing experiences, you're ranking them. And ranking leads to resentment. Because when you say, I wasn't like that, what your child hears is, you're soft, you're weak, you're not enough. And nothing makes a human being, especially an adult child, want to retreat emotionally faster than being told their life struggles are an embarrassment to the family legacy. But why do we say it? Because it's habitual grief. That phrase is what happens when we look at the younger generation and feel like we don't understand them anymore. So instead of asking questions, we grab the only language we know, comparison. It's a form of emotional nostalgia. And nostalgia, when weaponized, becomes judgment. In Buddhism, we're taught to examine clinging, and nowhere is clinging more visible than in the ego's death rattle, clinging to relevance, clinging to pride, clinging to being right about the past. Back in my day is just the ego's way of screaming, someone please validate me before I turn into a framed photo on the shelf. But here's the thing. You don't need to be validated through comparison. You can be respected through presence. That's the harder path, but it's the one that leads to connection. Let me tell you about Edna. Edna is 81, sharp as a tack, wears a turtleneck like it's armor, and sips gin with quiet precision. She came to one of my group sessions on elder communication and said, my daughter never takes my advice. Every time I give it, she gets cold. I just want her to know I've been through things. I've lived. I asked her what kind of advice she gave. Oh, things like, when I was your age, I didn't need a babysitter just to go to the grocery store. I put you in the cart and hoped for the best. There was silence in the group. Then another woman whispered, "That's not advice, honey. That's a trap." Edna blinked, and then she laughed. A deep, slightly painful laugh. The kind that comes from realizing you've been trying to be helpful while holding a flamethrower. She started experimenting. Instead of making comparisons, she started asking questions. How are things going with the baby? What's parenting like these days? Is it okay if I offer a story from when I was a mom? Her daughter responded like someone hearing a familiar voice without the usual echo of shame. Within 3 months, Edna was being asked for advice instead of pushing it. All it took was shifting from correction to curiosity. When we say I wasn't like that, we're not just reminiscing, we're inviting the past to sit in the living room and start comparing everyone's shoes. This is what Buddhism calls the illusion of self. The you of the past is gone. That moment? Gone. That world? Gone. Trying to resurrect it only creates suffering, especially for those living in a very different reality. The healthy elder doesn't say, "I was better." They say, "I remember what it felt like, and I'm still learning how to show up now." Wisdom isn't a microphone, it's a mirror. And your kids don't need a lecture, they need a reflection that says, "Hey, I see how hard this is for you. Want to talk?" Instead of, "I wasn't like that at your age." Try, "I remember those years being tough in a different way. What's been hard for you lately? Can I share something that helped me back then? Not as a rule, just a story." These phrases don't invalidate, they invite. They build bridges instead of walls. They make your children feel like adults, not like who failed to meet the standard of your perfectly miserable past. So let's retire that phrase. Let's bury it next to "because I said so," and "eat it, there are starving kids in the world." Let's become elders, not editors. Let's offer our experience like an old sweater, worn, wise, optional. Not like a uniform they're failing to wear correctly. Because if love has any real wisdom left in it, it begins with listening. Even when what we hear makes us feel like strangers in a world we used to know. Part 2. You'll regret this when I'm gone. Let's just say it. This phrase is the emotional equivalent of faking your own funeral just to see who would cry. It usually slips out in a soft, theatrical voice, like you're auditioning for the part of martyr number 1 in your own family drama. And it sounds so gentle at first, doesn't it? "One day I won't be around, and then you'll miss me. I just hope you remember how much I did for you when I'm gone. You'll regret this when I'm dead." These lines come coded in vulnerability, but let's not pretend. They're weapons. Beautifully disguised ones. Blades hidden in roses. Because what they really say is, since I can't guilt you into loving me while I'm alive, I'll use my death to haunt your conscience. Yikes. It's like sending a Hallmark card that says, "Miss me yet?" from the afterlife. Here's why this phrase leaves scars. 1. It hijacks the relationship with fear. 2. It makes your mortality about their guilt. 3. It conditions them to associate your presence with looming absence. Instead of cultivating joy in the time you have left, it sprinkles a little grief onto every family meal. And trust me, nothing makes mashed potatoes taste worse than a side of existential dread. When you say this, what you might mean is, "I'm scared you won't remember me. I feel unimportant. I miss being the center of your world." But what they hear is, "I'll make sure you feel guilty when I die. You're failing me right now, and death will be your punishment. I'm not trying to connect, I'm trying to control you with mortality." And that kind of emotional pressure, it doesn't pull your child closer. It makes them want to take a deep breath and back away slowly. Because now, every interaction feels like they're walking through a graveyard where the headstones are pre-engraved with, "Here lies the parent you disappointed." Let's meet Robert. Robert is 78, proudly opinionated, and wears his disappointment like cologne. thick and unmissable. Whenever his daughter Emily couldn't come to Sunday dinner, he'd sigh and say, "Well, I'll be gone soon enough. Then you'll wish you had one more Sunday." Emily, 46, mother of two, working full-time, already barely holding herself together with coffee and podcasts, started to dread every phone call. She wasn't just dealing with her father's feelings. She was being handed an emotional countdown clock every time they spoke. Eventually she told him, "Dad, I know you won't be around forever, but I can't keep loving you through a fog of guilt and dying. I want to enjoy our time, not fear it." That broke something open in Robert, because he realized he wasn't trying to connect. He was trying to be remembered before he was even gone. And in doing so, he was teaching his daughter to mourn him prematurely, rather than celebrate him now. Buddhism doesn't shy away from death. It reminds us daily, this body will end. This life is fleeting. But here's the twist. Impermanence isn't meant to scare people into loving us. It's meant to awaken our presence, our kindness, our compassion, now. When you say, "You'll regret this when I'm gone," you're trying to wake your child up through fear. But Buddhism teaches, fear is a bad teacher. It rushes, it punishes, it demands. Love, on the other hand, waits with open hands, not ultimatums. If your desire is to be remembered, to be cherished, to be present in their life, then be memorable through kindness. Be cherished through consistency. Be present through presence, not pressure. Let's unpack this phrase into its real emotions, instead of, "You'll regret this when I'm gone." Try. These moments matter to me more than I can say. I'd love to share more of them while we still have them. I think about the time we have left and I hope we spend it well, together when we can. It brings me joy to see you. I hope there's space in your life for a little more of me. These phrases don't manipulate, they invite. They say, "Here I am, alive, loving, and not holding you hostage with my future absence." They create space for presence, not pity. And let's be honest, would you rather your child spend time with you because they love your company, or because they're scared they'll one day regret not showing up? One creates joy, the other creates anxiety. And if you've ever raised an anxious child, you know, anxiety doesn't make love grow, it makes love hide. We're all just walking each other home, but some of us keep reminding people how short the road is, until they stop walking with us at all. You don't have to become a ghost while you're still alive. You can be real, warm, funny, annoying, wise, weird, and still here. But you can't do that if every interaction carries the soft threat of your death. Let them grieve when it's time. Right now, let them laugh with you. Let them share a moment that doesn't end in the phrase, "before it's too late." Because nothing drives people away faster than turning love into a countdown. Part 3. You only call me when you want something. Let's talk about a phrase that sounds like a punchline but feels like a punch in the heart. You only call me when you want something. It usually comes out with a bitter chuckle, a raised eyebrow, maybe even a mock joyful tone like, "Oh, look who's calling, must mean you need something." Ha, ha. Underneath that fake laugh, a cocktail of resentment, loneliness, and the deep ache of not feeling wanted, only used. But here's what makes this phrase especially radioactive. It doesn't just guilt trip your child, it makes you the toll booth they regret having to pass through. Here's how this phrase actually lands. When your child hears, "You only call when you want something," they don't think, "Oh dear, I've hurt my parents' feelings, I should call more." No, they think, "Wow, calling you is emotionally exhausting. I'm being judged for reaching out. Next time, I'll just figure it out myself." It turns a moment of connection into a courtroom drama where they're the defendant, and you're both the judge and the disappointed audience. You might think you're being honest, but let's be real. That phrase is emotional bait, and your child knows there's a hook inside it. Let's pause here and ask the real question. Why would you say something like that? Because the call came on a Tuesday instead of a Sunday. Because they asked for help moving a couch but forgot your birthday last month? Because you feel like a backup singer in a band you used to headline? Look, I get it. It hurts when the only time the phone rings is when someone needs a ride, a check, or a babysitter. But that pain, that sting, is not a justification for weaponizing guilt. It's a signal. A bell ringing in your heart that says, I miss you. I want to be wanted, not just needed. But instead of saying that, which would be vulnerable, open, and sincere, we wrap it in sarcasm, coat it in bitterness, and hope they'll read between the lines. Newsflash, they won't. And even if they do, they'll resent you for making them decode it. Let me introduce Marvin. Marvin is 82, lives in a tidy apartment full of jazz records and regrets. He told me about how his daughter, Lisa, used to call him all the time when she needed help with her taxes. But one day, she called just to say hi. Instead of thanking her or enjoying the moment, Marvin blurted out, "Wow, a call with no agenda? Did the moon explode?" Lisa went silent. 2 weeks later, she texted, "Hey Dad, I've just been super busy. Hope you're well." And that was it. The end of their weekly calls. The emotional boomerang didn't come back. It wasn't until Marvin came to one of my Buddhist elder workshops that he understood what had happened. "I was hurt. She only called when she needed something," he said. "But the one time she didn't, I mocked her for it. I turned my own loneliness into a joke and killed the moment." That's the power of this phrase. It doesn't just push your child away. It teaches them that no matter what they do, it won't be enough. In Buddhist psychology, there's a teaching about non-attachment to outcomes. When we help, give, or love in order to get something in return, attention, gratitude, validation, we are no longer offering from the heart. We're offering from the ego's contract drawer. Help me, but also make me feel important. Call me, but also make me feel remembered. Love me, but on my terms, please. And this is where the pain lies. When you frame your relationship with your child as transactional, they start treating it like a transaction too. And the safest thing in a transaction is to limit how often you visit the store. The truth is, love isn't about being needed. It's about being known. And being known requires you to speak your real need, without guilt, without jabs, without bitterness. So ask yourself, am I hurt because I feel forgotten? Am I afraid I don't matter anymore? Am I hoping to be loved in a way I'm too scared to ask for directly? If the answer is yes, congratulations, you're human, and now you have a choice. Hide behind snark or open the door to connection. Instead of, you only call me when you want something. Try. It really means a lot to hear from you, even if it's just for a quick catch-up. I miss your voice. Want to chat sometime this week, just to talk? Or, if you're feeling brave, sometimes I feel like I don't matter unless you need something. That's hard for me to admit. I'd really just love to connect more. No agenda. Yes, that's vulnerable. Yes, it might make your voice shake, but vulnerability is not weakness. It's the doorway back to intimacy. One woman I worked with started texting her son once a week, not to remind him to call, not to complain, but just to say something kind, thinking of you. Loved your new photos. Hope today's not too hard. After a month, guess what happened? He started texting back. A little tenderness from her, without guilt, created emotional safety. And safety is the only place love can grow. So the next time the phone rings, whether it's for help moving, advice on car insurance, or just a minute of your time, don't judge the motive. Welcome the moment. Because you're not a service hotline. You're a human being who loves and wants to be loved back. And sometimes the fastest way to receive that love is to stop demanding it wears a certain costume. Part 4. I guess I'm just not important to you anymore. This next phrase doesn't show up at the beginning of a conversation. It's the dramatic third act, the Oscar-winning performance of the emotionally exhausted parent who's been quietly tallying every perceived slight since 2003. It sounds soft, almost innocent. I guess I'm just not that important to you anymore. but beneath the velvet, there's barbed wire. This line is not a question, it's a test. A test your child wasn't told they were taking, and one they almost always fail. Because what you're really saying is, I feel small, and I need you to make me feel big again. I feel unseen, so I'll say something just hurtful enough to get your attention. It's emotional fishing with dynamite. This phrase is a trap wrapped in a whimper. To the speaker, it feels like honesty. To the listener, it feels like emotional ambush, because it leaves no space for response, no room for dialogue. It's not, I miss you. It's not, I wish we connected more. It's, you failed me, now sit in it. And here's the psychological twist. Even if your child does rush in to reassure you, something's already broken. Because they didn't reach out from love. They reached out from obligation. And obligation, my dear friend, is not love. It's a very convincing imposter. Looks the same in low light, but it has a different smell. It smells like duty marinated in resentment. Let's talk about Helen. Helen, 76, retired music teacher, 5 cats, a stunning collection of porcelain angels, and a loneliness problem the size of Nebraska. She called her son, Peter, every Sunday, but one week he didn't answer. Then he didn't call back. A week went by, then 2. Finally he picked up, tired, distracted, mid-diaper change. Helen waited for her moment and dropped the bomb. Well, I guess I'm just not important anymore. That's okay. I'm used to it. And Peter, he froze. He wanted to say, Mom, I'm working 50 hours a week. The baby's teething, my wife hasn't slept in 4 days, I haven't had a hot meal in a month. But instead he just mumbled, sorry, Mom, and changed the subject. And inside, he started to shut down. Because that one line didn't just guilt him, it invalidated everything he was doing to survive. And this is what that phrase does. It centers the conversation on your pain and erases their context entirely. Suddenly, your child isn't a person with a life anymore. They're just a spotlight operator in the drama of your importance. In Buddhist teachings, there's a realm called the preta, or hungry ghost. It's filled with beings who have enormous stomachs and needle-thin necks. They're always starving, but nothing can satisfy them. This phrase, I guess I'm just not important to you anymore, is the voice of the hungry ghost. It says, feed me, prove I matter, make me feel whole. But the truth is, no one else can fill that hole. Not your child, not their time, not their reassurances. That work is yours. When you outsource your emotional self-worth to your children, you're no longer relating to them, you're consuming them. And people can feel that, even through the phone, especially through the phone. Let's be brave and translate this phrase into its real emotions. I feel left out of your life. I miss you and wish we were closer. I'm struggling with how little space I seem to take up in your world. These are beautiful, honest, vulnerable truths, but instead of speaking them plainly, we twist them into guilt. Why? Because vulnerability is scary. Guilt is easier. It gives the illusion of control. But love isn't built on control. Love is built on courage. Instead of, I guess I'm just not important to you anymore, try, I've been feeling a bit invisible lately, and I miss feeling connected to you. Is there a good time we can catch up soon? I'd really love to hear about your life. I'm working on sharing how I feel without blame, so here it is. I miss you. These phrases don't accuse, they invite. They leave space for your child to show up, not out of guilt, but out of choice. And when someone chooses to love you, even in the middle of their messy, overloaded, over-caffeinated life, that's when you know the connection is real. Not forced, not performed, but freely offered. Let me say this plainly. You matter. Not because your children visit every week, not because they call on time, not because they thank you for every meal, diaper, or bedtime story, but because you are still here, and your worth is not something they owe you. It's something you carry like a lantern, quiet, radiant, steady, whether they notice it or not, so light it anyway. Because one day, they might finally look up and see you not as the guilt merchant or the emotional toll collector, but as the person who loved them enough to let go of needing to be constantly reminded of it. Part 5. I wish I had raised you differently. This phrase is a soft grenade. It's whispered during a long sigh, muttered during a late-night phone call, or dropped into a conversation like a loose screw in a blender. You know, I wish I had raised you differently. Now, let's be generous. Sometimes this line is spoken from a place of genuine reflection, a kind of, if I knew then what I know now, sorrow. But here's the problem. You're not saying it into a journal. You're saying it to your child. And while you might think you're being honest, or even humble, what your child hears is the person you became isn't who I hoped for. My biggest parenting mistake was you. You're the product of my failure. Ouch. This isn't just guilt-inducing, it's identity-shattering. Because let's be real, most adult children already carry a backpack full of "Am I good enough?" And when a parent, especially in later life, says this line, it doesn't open a healing conversation. It slams the door shut on emotional security. It tells your child that their very existence is a flaw in your personal story. And that is a wound that echoes. Imagine being told, I wish I'd disciplined you more. I should have pushed you harder in school. I was too soft on you. And now look where we are. These phrases aren't about the past. They're a retroactive indictment of your child's entire personality. They don't say, I made mistakes. They say, you are the result of those mistakes. And that, my friend, is not vulnerability. It's a blame bomb with a bow on it. It forces your child to question whether the very way they live, think, speak, or parent is a symptom of your disappointment. Now you may say, that's not what I meant. But what matters isn't just intent. What matters is impact. And this phrase, it hits like a velvet sledgehammer to the soul. Grace, 79, a retired nurse with impeccable posture and a mean lemon pie, once told her son, sometimes I wonder if I'd been stricter. Maybe you wouldn't be struggling so much now. She said it in the kitchen. Light tone. Almost a passing thought. Her son, Alan, 45, recently divorced, dealing with anxiety and parenting challenges, said nothing in the moment. But later that night, he texted her, I love you. But today felt like a punch in the gut. I'm doing the best I can. Grace was stunned. She thought she'd been honest, reflective, wise even. But what she'd actually done was offload her guilt onto her son's shoulders, right when he was already drowning in his own. She didn't mean to say, you're broken because I failed you. But that's exactly what he heard. And what followed was a long season of distance, until she learned to say what she actually meant. I didn't always know how to be the parent you needed, but I'm so grateful for who you are, and I'm still learning. That one line rebuilt a bridge she didn't even know she'd burned. In Buddhist thought, regret is not shame. It's not punishment. It's a gentle awareness that says, had I been more awake then, I would have acted differently. That's it. Not, I ruined everything. Not, you turned out wrong. Not, let me tattoo my sorrow onto your sense of self. Regret, when seen clearly, is fuel for loving presence in the now. Not an invitation to rewrite the past by editing your child's identity. Here's the real truth. Your parenting shaped them, but it didn't define them. And if they're struggling now, it's not proof that you failed. It's proof that life is complicated. No one gets out without a few bruises and some therapy bills. If you find yourself saying or thinking, I wish I'd raised them differently, pause. Ask yourself, am I feeling guilty because I see them struggle? Do I wish I'd had more support, more knowledge, more calm? Am I afraid I damaged them? These are valid, honest human feelings. But your child is not your confessional booth. They are not your priest, your therapist, or your punching bag for unprocessed grief. They are someone who, like you, is figuring it out. And what they need isn't your revision of the past. They need your respect in the present. Instead of, I wish I had raised you differently. Try, there are things I wish I'd done better, but I'm proud of who you are now. I didn't always get it right, but you've grown into someone I deeply admire. I've learned a lot about parenting, some of it too late, but I still want to be here for you however I can. These statements do two things. One, they own your truth. Two, they affirm theirs. They say, I see both my mistakes and your beauty, and they're not mutually exclusive. Because the greatest gift you can give your child now is not regret. It's reconciliation with yourself, with them, with the myth that there was ever a perfect way to raise a human being. We think our job as parents is to raise them right, but maybe our real job is to love them through our own becoming. You're still becoming. They are too. Let it be messy. Let it be real. Let your love evolve louder than your regret. Part 6. Why don't you just move back in? This one might sound harmless, even sweet. You may have said it with a smile while putting out an extra plate at dinner. Why don't you just move back in? But beneath that twinkle in your eye is a psychological siren. Because this phrase, while it may be coated in nostalgia and meatloaf, can carry the emotional weight of 1,000 smothering hugs. Let's break it down. You say it jokingly, or maybe a little too seriously. Your kid laughs awkwardly and you say, well, I wouldn't mind it. We've got the guest room. It's your room anyway. They smile, but inside, something tightens. Because here's what they hear. Let's rewind your life. Let's pretend adulthood never happened. Let's collapse the space between us so I can feel needed again. What you meant as love, they hear as invasion. And if there's anything adult children are allergic to, besides unsolicited opinions on how they raise their kids, it's the sense that you don't see them as grown, autonomous humans. It sounds like a warm invitation, but what it often signals is emotional regression. It pulls your child backward, not because they want to return, but because you never fully let them go. This phrase unconsciously says, I preferred when you lived here, and I still do. Your independence is inconvenient to me. If I can't have your time, I'll try to reclaim your presence. And while you may just want more dinners together, more casual chats, more spontaneous hugs, what they feel is pressure. They feel you're not respecting their life as it is now. Instead, you're offering a rewind button disguised as an open door. But your child's not who they were at 17. They have habits now, preferences, maybe even partners who hate your wallpaper, and a dog that sheds on your sofa. Inviting them to move back in, unless it's an emergency or mutually discussed, feels less like love and more like a soft attempt at control. It's not about the home, it's about the emotional undertow that pulls them back to being the child you still need them to be. Dennis, 80, widower, former high school principal, once told me over tea, I told my son he could always move back in. I even said I'd give him the big bedroom again. He laughed, but then he stopped visiting as often. Turns out his son, Ray, 43, didn't find the offer comforting. He found it suffocating, because each time he visited, his dad would drop more hints. It's quiet here since you left. I still keep the fridge stocked with your favorite soda. You know you wouldn't have to pay rent. Eventually, Ray sat his dad down and said, Dad, I love you, but I don't want to feel like I'm disappointing you just by having my own life. And that, right there, is the crux of it. Love doesn't mean being close all the time. Love means respecting the space between us and still choosing connection. Dennis didn't need Ray to move back in. What he really needed was permission to grieve the quiet, to feel the ache of the empty room without trying to refill it with grown children who had already flown the coop. In Buddhism, we talk about non-attachment, not as indifference, but as freedom from clinging. And this phrase, why don't you just move back in, is often a cry of clinging dressed as caregiving. You're not asking for physical proximity. You're asking for emotional reassurance. But in trying to get it, you may unintentionally erase the sacred distance that allows your child to breathe, to grow, and yes, even to love you more fully from afar. A healthy relationship is like a good fire. You need space between the logs for the flames to breathe. Cram the logs together? You smother the fire. Let your child come closer when they choose. But don't try to bring them back by undoing the adulthood they've spent decades building. Instead of, why don't you just move back in? Try, I miss having you around. Would you be up for spending a weekend here sometime? I love the energy you bring to this house. Maybe we can have more visits, even if just short ones. Your old room still makes me smile. I know it's just a memory, but I hold it with love. These phrases speak the real need. I miss you. I love your presence. Your absence leaves a quiet space I haven't yet learned to fill. And those needs? They are beautiful. They are real. And they don't require undoing your child's independence in order to be honored. Part 7. Your partner changed you. This next phrase? Oh, it's a real piece of emotional dynamite wrapped in passive-aggressive wrapping paper. It often arrives at family dinners, holiday gatherings, or in the middle of a guilt-laced voicemail that begins with, "Hi, it's just me, again." The phrase, your partner changed you. You might dress it up as a joke. You might slip it into a sentence like, "You were so much warmer before you met Brad." You might even mutter it to a friend, thinking your child won't find out. Spoiler alert, they always find out. And when they do, you can bet your casserole they'll start pulling away faster than you can say, "It's not what I meant." Because here's the brutal truth. This phrase doesn't just insult your child's partner. It insults your child's judgment, their identity, their agency. You're not just saying they're bad for you. You're saying you were better before you stopped needing me. Let's look at what's really going on under this phrase. When you say your partner changed you, what you might be feeling is abandoned, left out, no longer needed, maybe even jealous. Yes, you can admit it, it doesn't make you wicked, just human. But what your adult child hears is, I can't respect your choices. I don't accept who you've become. I liked you better before you had boundaries. Even worse, you put them in a loyalty triangle. In one corner, you. In the other, their spouse or partner. And in the middle, your child, who now has to pick a side, even if they don't want to. Guess which side they pick? The one that doesn't give them guilt ulcers. And over time, your child may decide it's just easier to stay away than to hear one more not-so-subtle jab about how their wife doesn't let them visit or how their husband keeps them busy. This is how relationships erode, not with a bang, but with 1,000 sighs and a dozen awkward silences. Let's talk about Barbara. Barbara is 68, retired librarian, and absolutely adored her son Jacob. Until Jacob met Stephanie. Now Stephanie was, how do I put this gently, not Barbara's favorite human. She had tattoos, ran her own Pilates business, and called Barbara by her first name instead of Mrs. Green. Sacrilege. Over the years, Barbara would make little comments. Jacob never acted this way before you got married. I know Stephanie prefers you to spend holidays with her side. You used to be so good at calling me every week. Each phrase like a teaspoon of vinegar in the family tea. One night, during Thanksgiving dinner, Barbara, after 2 glasses of boxed wine and a sharp look across the table, snapped, "I just feel like I lost my son the day you married her." The silence that followed was louder than thunder. The next morning, Barbara got a text. "Mom, we're taking some time away from this relationship. Please respect our space." That time lasted 18 months. She missed Christmas, her birthday, and the birth of her first grandchild. It took therapy, a lot of journaling, and a handwritten apology to even get her foot back in the emotional door. Barbara's turning point? Realizing she wasn't mourning her son's partner, she was mourning her loss of center stage. "I thought I was being loving," she told me later. "But I was really just trying to stay in control, in a new story where I wasn't the main character anymore." Here's where Buddhism slices the situation like a samurai through denial. Attachment causes suffering, especially when we mistake love for ownership. Your child isn't a replica of you. They're not an extension of your legacy or an emotional pension plan. They are a sovereign being. And once they partner up, their center of gravity shifts. That doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means you're not the North Star anymore. You might be Jupiter now. Beautiful, distant, still important, but no longer the axis. When you cling to the past version of your child, the one who confided in you, relied on you, looked to you for every decision, you're clinging to a ghost. In Buddhist thought, we are asked not just to love our children, but to love them as they are now. That means honoring who they choose to love. Even if that person wears Crocs, overcooks rice, or doesn't use coasters on your antique furniture. Your partner changed you is the ego screaming, "I want my version of you back." But real love whispers, "I'm learning to love this new version of you, even if I don't fully understand it yet." Instead of, "Your partner changed you," try, "I'm still getting to know the person you're becoming, and I want to be part of your life as it grows." It's been a big shift for me. I miss some of our old rhythms. Could we create some new ones together? These aren't manipulations. They're invitations. They acknowledge your grief without weaponizing it. They show your child you're not fighting for control, you're fighting for connection. And connection doesn't come from judgment. It comes from curiosity. So here's your challenge. Next time you're tempted to blame their partner, pause. Ask yourself, am I speaking from my heart? Or from the ghost of who I thought they'd always be? If it's the ghost talking, thank it kindly and ask it to sit down. Because the present moment, messy, grown up, and tattooed, is where your child lives now. And if you want to meet them there, you'll have to leave the old storyline behind. So, what did we learn, dear ones? That love doesn't disappear with age, but it does sometimes put on a disguise. It shows up sounding like sarcasm, like regret, like a sigh at the end of a voicemail. But underneath all those phrases, the "I guess I'm not important anymores" and the "you'll regret this when I'm gone's," there's really just one aching truth. I miss you. I still want to matter. I want to love without scaring you away. And you can. You still can. Because the most powerful part of communication, it's not your voice, it's your awareness. When you speak from presence, not pain, your words become medicine instead of memory. Let's recap. Comparison kills curiosity. Guilt disguises itself as honesty. Control often wears the mask of closeness, and regret can echo through generations, unless we meet it with compassion. But now, you know better. And when we know better, we speak better. If this video opened your eyes or even just made you laugh through your tears, help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers by tapping that little red button, giving this a thumbs up, or sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below. Which phrase surprised you the most? Which one are you working on releasing? Until next time, may your words be light, your heart be open, and your family remember, there's still time to walk each other home.